If you stamp your feet and shout enough, you'll get what you want. And of course, the reality is that that's not really how it works. Most of us will reach a more rational viewpoint at some stage that's more considered and more thought through and more sensible when we start to make sense of things.
The Question Is, from Thinking Focus, a podcast about how our thinking impacts our results and what we can do about it.
Hello, I'm Richard from Thinking Focus.
Hello, I'm Rob from Thinking Focus. So the question is, Rich, why do some people think during times of change that an emotional response will get them what they want?
I don't know. Why are you asking me? What are you asking me for? Why are you asking? So you mean an emotional response like that?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
So don't flip out on me.
I think it's completely natural that at times of change, the first reaction that we often have is a really emotional one. And when we say emotional, we don't mean tears and crying. Although it could be that.
Could be, yeah.
But we also mean perhaps getting angry or, feeling anxious or getting agitated, those sorts of things.
So the whole range of emotions.
The whole range. But it's totally normal that the first thing that we do, and, this goes back to sort of, early stages of man,
right,
that one of the reactions that we had if we came across a tiger was we had an emotional reaction that kind of kicked a trigger in that went, okay, do I hide or do I run? What do I do? And that's still prevalent in an organisational setting when change happens, is that it's a defence mechanism.
So that's really interesting, because that connotation for me, that means that emotional response is actually quite helpful at that time.
Absolutely. It can be. It can also be a release of pressure.
Right.
It's a very natural reaction. And people sometimes feel that if they stamp and shout enough, then they'll get their own way. I mean, we know that from, the behaviour that we see that we've all done when we were younger, or maybe that some of us still do now. But if you stamp your feet and shout enough, you'll get what you want.
Absolutely.
And of course, the reality is that that's not really how it works. And most of us will reach a more rational viewpoint at some stage that's more considered and more thought through and more sensible when we start to make sense of things. But in a change journey, that could be quite a long way along the journey.
Right. Well, so what might cause us to have, what might be a couple of triggers that might take us from more of an emotional response to a more rational response? Is it just that we need more time with that, or are there things that we can do?
It could be, certainly time is one element of it. Another element of it is if I can get some clarity about what's happening. Another element might be is if I can be surrounded by some people that are a positive influence, about the change that's going on.
Right.
Because if I'm surrounded by people who are also feeling very emotional and very concerned or worked up or agitated, then that's probably only going to mean I get more emotional about the situation.
In your experience, what do you think the most damaging emotion can be during times of change? Hardest to deal with, I think. I mean by that.
Hardest to deal with? Difficult question. Immediately you think, well, someone that's angry.
Right.
But often anger will dissipate.
Okay.
You don't stay angry forever, do you?
No.
That will dissipate after a while. I think perhaps the emotional one that can be the hardest to deal with is if someone feels that the change that has happened is really unfair.
Right. Okay.
So they feel a personal, they feel it's a personal vendetta, or they feel that they've been hurt by it in some way.
Is there some fear attached to that?
There could be some fear, and
the individual feeling they're fearful of the outcome or fearful of what it means. Yeah,
fearful of what it means for them. Okay. Fearful about the future for their team or themselves or whatever it is.
Right.
But that sense of unfairness can take a while to heal. And you could provide me with loads of clarity. You could tell me it'll all be all right. You could do all those sorts of things. But if I feel it's really unfair, those things might not help my sense of unfairness disappear. Okay.
So, and as an emotional response, I completely understand that, because I might feel that it's something that's unfair to me personally. So I'm internalising this organisational change or team change, for example, in a work setting, to feel really quite personally hurt or aggrieved or fearful of it or fearful of the outcome.
Yeah.
What about if that unfairness is based on some previous experience?
Yeah, it could be that I've experienced something like this before, or somebody else close to me has, or whatever. And I see it through that lens. So I pull on that experience from the past, or I see it through someone else's lens that makes me feel that way. So again, some of this is about the story that we create in our mind when we look ahead, which is what we do all the time. We create a narrative, don't we,
right,
about what the future will look like.
Right.
The thing is that narrative is not always, well, it's not correct. It's just a guess, isn't it?
Okay,
It's an imagined, state for the future. So what we're saying here is that actually my emotional response might be because my view of the future has been threatened.
Right.
And what kind of has to happen is I've got to come to a realization that there might be a different version of the future than the one I was imagining.
So if we were to think about, how could I help myself with that? What would help me to turn more of the emotional stuff off and more of the rational stuff on?
Well, I think first thing that will help is to recognise that an emotional reaction is normal.
Okay.
So that's absolutely fine.
Right.
Second thing might be to write down everything that's going through my head that feels really unfair or emotional.
Right.
And actually then to get some help maybe to question whether those things are real or not.
Okay, because most of that's based on perception. Could be based on experience, and then us projecting, as you're talking before, about the stories the narrative that we give ourselves about the future. So that's only the perception is reality until proven otherwise, isn't it?
Yeah.
So based on those perceptions, we need to perhaps get some help to get that made clear.
Yeah,
real.
so write them down and maybe sit with a colleague or a manager if that's appropriate, and sort of work out whether these are real or not, or whether they're just perceptions.
Yeah.
But what you can do from there then is to create, from the things that are real, that are known, is create some questions.
Right.
Which might then be, how could I react to this? How might this affect me? Who could help me get more clarity? What do I need to know more about? Whatever those questions are. But then you can go and look for some information that can help, rather than perhaps just stewing on it in an emotional state.
Well, it's interesting because that causes me to think about the whole issue of control and being out of control. So an emotional response seems to indicate that somebody's out of control of what's currently going on.
Yeah.
So they're fighting against that, stamping their feet, etc.
Yeah.
So your suggestions conjure up for me that actually all of that is helpful because it's bringing a level of control back. What can you control?
Yeah, I
think
think you've got to work out what you can control and what you can't. So you're not necessarily going to be able to stop the change.
No.
You're not necessarily going to be able to redirect the change in the way you want it to happen.
Right.
But what you might be able to do is control your reaction, control what you can do, control what you can find out, and make a plan along those lines that could be helpful for you over the next week, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever. So that's something you could do. Also, if you're leading and managing others, that's something you could do with people.
Right.
Would be to sit down and talk about how do they feel, what's going through the mind, and what is within their control that they, in the way that they want to react to whatever it is that's going on.
Okay. So how possible could it be that we rationalise certain things, and then as the change develops, right, because change in my experience is never a short thing, it lasts over a certain number of months, etc., it could be longer, that I might rationalise certain things, but then a new development happens or something unexpected comes back into... Can I flip back into emotional again? Is that
absolutely,
something?
yeah. No, it might be simply something that is said or an email that's sent, and you can flip straight back into emotional.
Yeah.
So I think that is then about recognising what's triggered that,
right?
Recognising that you're back in that state, in the emotional state, letting it play out. Don't beat yourself up, because again, it's natural.
Yeah.
But almost wait for it to pass and start to look at the rational response. So, again, perhaps write down what's going through your head and look at what of this is real, what of this is perceived, where am I making up the bits in the middle? And from that, again, form some questions. So you will, absolutely normal for people to bounce around these things at times of organisational change.
Okay.
No question about that. And you'll spot that if you're managing people, because you'll spot... It's easy to spot the emotional reaction because it's very passionate often. or it could be that someone withdraws. That could be another one.
Yeah.
That it's all going on inside the head, but they've gone quiet.
Yeah.
And that could be another key that someone's feeling that way.
Yeah, okay. No, that's good. So that's really helpful. So to summarise that, I think what we've talked about there is it's absolutely natural during times of change for people to have an emotional response.
Yes.
You're more likely to have an emotional response before you have a rational response.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost impossible to expect at times of change people to see this really rationally and you're all happy and make sense of it.
I understand it.
Until they've gone through some emotions.
And so what we're really talking about here is the emotional stuff will be loud and proud, right at the centre of all of that. But we need to raise our own awareness about, and we need to, as leaders, to be aware of other people's behaviour and how they might be responding to it. And what you've described really nicely is that we're never necessarily going to have just emotional and irrational as black and white.
Yeah.
What we're going to do is we're going to rationalise our emotional response.
Yeah.
We're going to slowly become more rationalised about it.
And don't be afraid to go and talk to someone.
Yeah.
Because the more you think about it, the harder it becomes sometimes to differentiate one thing from another.
And I think that's the only other thing to summarise on this. Actually, those descriptions were about getting some control back. You can control your feelings only if you are quite pragmatic about getting some help, writing things down, searching for meaning in stuff. In other words, rationalising that emotional response.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that, Rich.
Thanks, Rob.
Next time on The Question Is...
Change is going to unsettle you in some way, shape or form.
Because I haven't got the answers.
Haven't got the answers. It's that fear of the unknown. What does this mean for me? And that can trigger some emotional reactions. That can also trigger some questions, some soul searching to go on.
To find out how Thinking Focus can unlock the potential within your organisation, go to www.thinkingfocus.com, where you'll discover more about the work we do, helping our clients increase productivity and enable change.
Hi, this is Paul from Thinking Focus. I just wanted to let you know that this podcast is part of a series on the myths that often occur during times of organisational change. You can find other podcasts in the series and some special resources related to these myths at thinkingfocus.com/myths.